Welcome to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm your host, Egan. I'm the owner of Caravan Digital. We're a digital marketing agency for e-commerce brands. And today I'm really excited because I'm speaking with Sam Boyd, who's a content coach at Copysmith. Sam, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to get to know you and talk about copysmiths.
Sounds great. What is a content coach? I've never heard that title before.
So a content coach can be compared with a developmental editor. So basically when a writer submits an article, I will go through the article and I will essentially coach the writer on areas in which they can improve their article. So like areas where the reader might not have enough information from what the writer's written, and areas where, maybe there's not a logical flow of information or things like that. So I really just take a finished article and help the writer just get the most out of it.
That's great. So it sounds like this is part of SEO, blogging, and content writing. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Tell us a little bit in terms of, what are the mistakes you see people making when they're writing blog articles?
The biggest mistake I see people make quite regularly is that they will have thin content in their article. And thin content is essentially, as I was saying, where you don't give the reader enough information. And what this does is it promotes the reader to look for more information that your blog's not included. And most of the time that's done on a competitor's website. And so it's a really quick way where you can basically lose your reader to someone else without even realizing it.
That's interesting. Is there an example that comes to mind on a recent one that you looked over and you said, hey, we're really missing this piece?
Yeah, I think the most prominent example that comes to my mind is when the writer will tell the reader to actually go somewhere. So we had this client recently who they make customizable cutting boards, okay, so for kitchens and stuff. And the writer had, instead of going into detail about ordering the customizable cutting boards, they told the reader how they could make DIY cutting boards, and if they didn't want to make DIY cutting boards, then to go ahead and make custom ones. And I said to the writer, what you're doing here is essentially you're telling the reader to not use their service. And so they barely spent any time on talking about these custom cutting boards and focused on this DIY aspect, which the client's going to look at and they're going to say, hang on, why would we want that when we do a custom service?
Is there a piece of keyword research that goes into this in terms of, you're making sure to answer questions inside a blog post?
So the biggest keyword research we do comes down to, so we'll have like the main topic keyword, which we get from services like Ahrefs and things like that. And we essentially just create compelling titles based on that keyword, which, will engage the reader. We really like to do listicles because we find that numbers are really successful in titles. And so we'll have this primary keyword, and at the end of the article we try to have a frequently asked questions section, which we source from websites like Answer the Public or from Google, just doing Google searches and seeing what other people are looking for. So I don't know if you know, but if you type one or two words into Google, it'll give you the rest of the result. And so that's normally what people are looking for. So we really promote putting that into a frequently asked questions section, which is really great if done successfully at getting your article into the featured snippet on Google, which will go actually above the ranking article. And so we always try to include them where possible, but we try to avoid doing keyword stuffing and just putting tons of keywords in an article, because we feel it saturates the content and then the article doesn't read naturally. And so the reader would then come onto the article and they'll be able to see that they're reading something that was written to rank and not to actually help.
So you got to write for humans and for search engines, right?
Yeah, that's what we go for, but we definitely put the focus on the writing for humans first. I mean, I've read so many articles on the internet, maybe you have as well, where you open the article and what you'll get is a ladder of keywords, and you look at it and you think, well, this isn't helpful at all. Or you'll go onto an article, you'll have a specific question in mind, you'll Google it, the question will be in the headline, but then when you open the article, it's buried right at the bottom of the article and you have to scroll for about 20 minutes to get to it. And so we really try to avoid all things like that. We just try to make helpful pieces of content that the reader can open, they can get the information from, and in doing so, they'll learn to trust the website. So the next time they have a question, they'll look for that website in particular.
Uh-huh. That's great. My brother gets so irritated at like recipes of he's looking for a particular recipe and there's a whole story of this goes back to my family generations. He's just like, just tell me what I need to put in this to cook it.
It's actually quite interesting recipes though, because the reason they do that is because Google punishes content that's under a certain word count. So if the recipe was just a straight up recipe, then Google would look at it and say, well, there's not a lot of words here, so they'd pop it down. So recipes have to have all this information in, and that's why you tend to have like a jump to recipe button. So it's quite interesting how they have no choice, and that's why they all do it.
That's interesting. You mentioned the FAQ part and trying to get in the featured snippet. Are you guys using any markup for that? Do you have to do anything special in terms of the back end to tell Google this is an FAQ?
Not particularly, to be honest. I mean, it's all about using H tags, and so H tags are essentially like your headings and things like that. And so, like, the way Google works, because it's a web crawler, it will crawl through your article, and it'll see you've got a heading in there. Okay, so it'll see you've got like the heading as a question, and it'll grab particular keywords in that heading. Okay, and then what it will try to do is it will try to relate those keywords to the text directly following it, and if it can make a connection, it'll see you're given relevant information, and therefore it'll put it up to the featured snippet. So when you're writing a frequently asked questions section, the most important thing you can do is to answer the question directly and concisely. You can't beat around the bush. You can't give like incoherent information. You need to be direct, not just for the reader, but so Google, when it crawls through your article, can look at your headline and it can immediately see your answers related to that headline, and so it'll put it as that featured snippet whether or not it's a frequently asked questions section. It just needs to be able to see that what you're doing is related.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are I'm curious on the ideation side of things. How do people, let's say e-commerce brands, they're selling products. What sort of content should they write? How should they brainstorm ideas for blog articles?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So the best way to brainstorm, there are a few things you can do. The first of which is to talk to your customers, and I think that's really important, because if you talk to your customers, you can find out where there are gaps within your product. So maybe you have a product you're selling, and for all you know, 50% of your customers are getting it and they don't know how to use it. So you can like do surveys of your customers and things like that. And once you know where there's like a knowledge gap with your own products, well, you've got a how-to guide there and things like that. And the best thing to do as well is to work in clusters as well. So if you take a keyword, so for example, if you're selling, I don't know, vacuum cleaners, you take your keyword vacuum cleaner and you look at it in Google, you look at it on, I'm sure you've seen all these keyword research tools like Surfer and like Ahrefs and things like that, and you can see what people are looking for. And so the best thing to do is to pick out keywords which like are that have a high search volume, but not necessarily a high like competition. So you can go into like long tail keywords and things like that, and to just like come up with a plan of like 10 articles or 20 or 30 that you want to write. Get a content scheduling calendar to like put out these articles on a regular schedule and just post them and just keep them coming regularly and just stick to the same topic. And it's really important as well that you have when you've got a bunch of ideas, you have one pillar article. So you have the big article, which is going to be a buyer's guide, right? So say example, sticking with vacuum cleaners, and I don't know why I chose vacuum cleaners, but you'll have your buyer's guide for this vacuum cleaner, and then like kind of like a web, all around it, you'll have loads of smaller articles, so your 1,200 word articles that are how-to lists, that will all kind of backlink to your big pillar article, and so you essentially get this cluster of topics that when people come in will be driven to your main article. And so like I kind of rambled on a bit there, but
No, that's great. We have a client that sells e-bikes, electric bikes, and we're working on them on just, how do we get a guide, like the ultimate guide to buying an e-bike? Because there's a lot of decisions to make. It's a pretty big purchase. People spend, $1 to $2,000 plus, and apparently a lot of things can go wrong. And this client, really does not want to do returns. That's expensive to deal with, and so it's important that people choose the right one. I'm curious, when you do a buyer's guide with a client, do you mention other brands' products?
Only if we're comparing them. Like, we'll never link to another brand, but if we're doing a buyer's guide, we might talk about what our client's brand does better. And of course, when we say that, we won't just be like saying hearsay. We'll prove it with facts and statistics, but we'll never like mention a client's brand, a competitor's brand, in a sense that we're promoting it. Do you see what I mean? Or we won't link to their we won't link to their website either. But yeah, and I just have to reiterate: we'll never do hearsay. We'll never just say, and this links into thing content. We'll never just say, for example, buy this e-bike. It's better than the competitors. We'll do a fair argument. We'll say, so here's one e-bike. It does this really well. It does this really well, and this other e-bike doesn't include this. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I'm curious. Yeah, I know you guys got a tried and tested template you've really used. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, our template. So when when a writer picks up an article, they'll open it up. So we provide the documents that they write in, and what they'll see before them already looks like a finished article. So we use a language in our templates called lorem ipsum, which is essentially gibberish. But what it does is it allows the writer to see what the article should look like when it's finished. So it'll have all the headings, it will have bullet lists, it will have placeholders where they can put visual interest in, and it'll have like a frequently asked question on the end already, like all made with this language called lorem ipsum. So it'll look and feel like a finished article. And so it's essentially the writer's job to come in and fill in the gaps. And the advantage of doing that is when a client comes through and they order a bunch of articles for us, they know what to expect. They know what they're going to get. They'll know that their articles will have a particular look and feel to them with little variation. And that's really good for their customer base as well, because the customers will be able to jump onto their website and they'll always see this particular structure in their articles that can be relied on, that's authoritative, that shows in-depth content, that's on search intent. And so in terms of buyer's guide, when our writers write a buyer's guide, we'll tell them, we'll have the headline, we'll have a 200-word introduction, and we'll put a placeholder for a bullet list in the introduction just to talk about the benefits the reader will get from reading the article. And then below that, we'll have heading suggestions. And the advantage of doing that on Google Docs is we can also leave comments on the heading suggestions where we've got information from a particular client saying, look, the client wants you to do this here or include this bit of information here and all that. So the writer essentially goes in and they're able to just fill in the gaps and create a really successful article that you can look at and say, yeah, that's a Copysmith's article.
I was going to ask, how do you get people from a blog post then? Maybe you could talk a little bit about why blogging is important for marketing, but then also once someone is on your blog, how do you get them to a product page to get them to buy?
Okay, so talking about why blogging is important to marketing, the key thing with blogging is that not only does it build authority for you, and does it show and it shows that you know what you're talking about. So for example, for your e-bike client, if I was to start a website today on e-bikes, Google would look at it and they'd see that I have no idea what e-bikes are and I've just started a blog on e-bikes, and so they wouldn't rank me because they're looking for authoritative content. Yet if I'm an e-bike website with 100 blog articles on e-bikes and I'm selling e-bikes, Google will look at it and it'll be able to see straight away, well, this person's an authority in their niche. They know about e-bikes, let's put them to the top of Google. And so having a blog article, a blog page is a really good idea to build that site and domain authority. So Google looks at you or whatever search engine you're trying to rank on and puts you up there. And another advantage as well is it just gives you more avenues for traffic to come in. So like you're going to target particular keywords, you're going to get your long tail keywords, and so you're broadening your horizon, so you can catch all kinds of traffic searching for different things, and they'll come to your website. And moving on to getting from a blog article to an actual product page, we have two ways of doing that, and it really depends on what our client wants. So we can do really overt call to actions. So you've read the article, and at the end we'll say something like, great, buy our product today, and we'll talk about how the client's really great, and we'll link to their actual product page. And so that's one way of doing it. But we find when you're doing that, readers know that they're being sold to, right? So they'll get to this call to action and they'll kind of be like, oh, yeah, then move on to something else. But some companies like that. Some companies like that and they want that. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way that's less overt and more natural is just in the body of our blog content, we'll subtly put interlinks to the client's product in like areas which would be compelling for the reader to click on them. So, for example, you might be reading an article and like sticking to this client that we've been doing a lot of recently who do cutting boards. We'll talk about how having a high-end cutting board is really important, and we'll talk about how one of the major problems with a high-end cutting board is that if you don't maintain it properly, after a couple of years it will be no good. And so within the text we'll have a guide on how to properly maintain your cutting board, and in that guide we'll link to their wood cutting board care kit and stuff like that. So we essentially save the reader time. So they're reading this guide, they've just bought a product and they're like, okay, I want to maintain it. So rather than go and look for a maintenance kit, they'll just click on the link that we've given them because it's right there, and readers are always after the easiest solution, and that's a really good natural way to get readers to your product page.
Yeah, so I started my digital marketing career as an SEO consultant, and one of the things we really saw with content was that people are asking questions all the time. They're Googling questions, and if you just have product pages, clients often resist and don't want to blog. This is so much work and so on, and obviously you guys help solve that problem. But people have questions about their problems. They have questions about products. They have questions about all kinds of things. And your blog gives you a chance to answer those questions. And so Google thinks in URLs. And so as a content marketer and an SEO, you have to as well. And so to answer people's specific questions, you need pages that address those specific questions. And so kind of like Sam, you mentioned, like put the question or put a variant of the question right in that header, the H1, 2, 3, or 4 tag. And so Google understands this is the question, and then the paragraph text that follows that or the bullet points that follow that is an answer, and that can get you in the featured snippet, which sometimes people can just get the answer right on Google, but oftentimes they will actually click in and read the rest of your blog post as well. So that's a big reason we've seen. Another thing that we really saw work was going back and revisiting old blog content. So oftentimes people are kind of on to the next one. And really, there's a lot of value in Google Search Console. So Google Analytics gives you the data on what are people doing on your site. Google Search Console gives you the data about how did people Google to find your site, right? So kind of that same information you might look in a Google Ads account of impressions and clicks by search terms. Well, you can get that data by query on the Google side, or you can even look at Bing Webmaster Tools as well, which can be kind of interesting. And you can see, here's a keyword phrase that's showing up in Search Console for this particular page or blog post. We didn't even mean to write about that, but maybe we could add a whole section. And so go back and re-optimize old blog posts. We've seen tremendous results from that. And in some cases, maybe we've been blogging a long time and we have different posts that are competing with each other. And it's time to consolidate those and redirect one to the other and have one master blog post. Like you mentioned, Google is often, privileging higher word count. And so if you have a more authoritative, more in-depth article, that can rank better. So that's a little bit of what we've seen in the trenches.
Yeah, and I think that's like some of the really important things you said there was having that authoritative content that just shows that what you're talking about, because that's really what Google looks for.
We didn't talk about this before, so if I'm putting you on the spot, let me know. But I'm curious, is there a post you guys have published that you could pull up and share and just kind of talk us through the anatomy of it?
And I'm sharing a blog article from our own website rather than a customer's website, if that's okay. So we write all of our own blog articles too, but it gives an example of how essentially work, if you will. So if I just share my screen with you now and just...
So I see a really nice looking blog. 4 key components of high quality blog content. This is kind of meta. I appreciate this.
Yeah, I thought it was quite relevant.
The design is fantastic. It's kind of, people have like Simpsons color skin on here, which is fun. And then there's most recent posts on the right. All the images look fantastic is actually the first thing that jumps out to me. They're not stock photos. They're kind of fun cartoons. And looks like a bunch of helpful content. There's a way, got a question. There's a form right on the side.
What you said there is something that we should actually discuss, how you mentioned that there's no stock images. So a lot of problems with stock images is people they're purely decorative, and so readers will just scroll past them. They won't stop on them, and so it essentially just is filler content. So one thing we actually do is we have a team of graphic designers, and so we design a lot of our images for our blog posts customly, is that a word? And custom. And so what we really try to do with our images is we try to include images that add value to your content. And so essentially, because a lot of readers, because they like to skim read, and I'm sure you skim read as well, I skim read, and look for the most relevant information. If you have a decent image on your content, what it actually does is it stops the reader from skim reading, and they stop and they look at the image, which might seem like a small thing, but what that does is it increases your website's lurk rate, which for Google, when it looks at you, it can then say, well, people are... So it's little tactics like that that just keep the reader on your website for a little longer. And so Google will look at it and they'll say like, wow, people are staying on this webpage for a long time. Let's rank it. So it's a really effective little tactic there.
I love it. That's the first time I've heard lurk rate. I like that angle. I think I've heard it called dwell. I've heard it dwell time. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I've had dwell time, lurk rate. It's all like, yeah.
That's great. All right, Sam. We'll scroll on down. Talk us through that. I see a pull quote right away. I see the date and who wrote it. Talk us through. What are the components here?
Okay, so you can see at the top here, as you say, we've got a block quote. So we think that's really important again for building authority. So this is all something that's like really subtle tactics. So like you see testimonials and things like that, the reader's going to get trust in you, and that's a word I'm going to keep saying because it's so important, that trust and authority word. So, and you'll see as well we have a link as well right at the beginning of the article, but interestingly enough, that link is a internal link. As you see, it goes to another page on our website. So one thing that's really important in your articles is you don't immediately send the reader away, because like they're on the introduction and you give them a link that goes to somewhere else, they're not coming back to your website. And so it's another really small tactic you need to consider to like just keep the reader on your page. And we've got a table of contents here, but interestingly enough, we don't really do table of contents anymore because we found that it didn't really add much. So we don't do that anymore. But yeah, so...
Can I also jump in here? I'll say a little bit of what I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing huge walls of text of massive paragraphs. I see the paragraphs are maybe a sentence or two, and they really keep you moving. There's quite a few bullet points. There's headers breaking things up. It's easy to skim, like you said.
Yeah, that's really, really important. So what it's actually called, and I don't know if you've heard the terms, it's called white space. And what it essentially does is, as you say, it makes your article really easy to skim. It makes your article super digestible in little chunks. Like, so you open up an article, and if it's filled with a big block of text, you're going to look at it and you're going to think, oh gosh, and you're going to leave. So we do that as well to just keep the readers on your page. And moving on as well, you'll see this table here, and really interesting. Tables are excellent for SEO, and so that's actually something we include in all of our articles. We include a relevant table because it's really good for Google to like grab onto and to dive into, and when it sees your article has a table in, it'll go, hey, this is a good article. So if you can include tables in your article, include tables in your article. Don't shoehorn them in, but like if you can include relevant tables, then you'll see this one here. It's like really easy to skim. It like you can get information from the benefits of different types of blog articles really quickly. And so like if you do a really data-filled really good table, then absolutely do that because Google loves it.
That's a great tip. I love this.
Yeah, and just moving on as well, you see our articles are really clear. So you'll see like the title, sorry, I don't mean to scroll a lot, but you'll see it's 4 key components of high quality blog content on the title. And so looking at our headlines, it's tip 1, moving on to where we were, it's tip 2. So when readers are reading it, they can get the information really clearly. They're not having to dive in and look for the tips. So skim readers can just skim to each tip, stop on each heading, and yeah, and you'll see moving on how like we've got images as well, as I say, that add value to the text. So this one's an actual image of a blog post that uses a table and a list. So funny enough, we're talking about how table and lists. So lists are really effective too because they're visual elements that again catch skim readers' eyes. You see a bullet list as a skim reader, you're stopping, you're reading that list, you're staying on the web page. And so this is what we're talking about in this article here, and this image as well, all about stopping the reader's eyes as they scroll down. So they're going to look at this image and they're gonna read it. They're not just gonna blindly scroll past it. Whereas if it was an image of a bunch of people pointing at a whiteboard, the reader's not stopping. They're scrolling past that, you know. So and again you'll see here as well, all our images are actually showing text from an e-commerce blog as well and things like that. So really important. And you'll see we've got this structure. You'll see that the structure is consistent. It's tip 1, tip 2, tip 3, tip 4.
Can you tell us about the gray box there?
This grey box here?
Right above tip 4, yeah. What was that?
Okay, so this is just what we'd like to do as well. So having, again, it's all about stopping the reader's eye and having this grey box in our background. It's something that actually, interestingly enough, newspapers quite do a lot. So I don't know if you've ever read a newspaper and you'll see like a bunch of text and you'll see like a grey box with a tip in or something like that. I'll have to apologise, I can't remember the technical term for it. Maybe you know the technical term, but from the top of my head, it's just gone.
I see. Like they've got call-out boxes to just mix up the design, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it mixes up the design, and again, it stops the reader, and it just shows what we tend to do is put really relevant information into the tip. So like, what the reader will do here is they'll stop because they'll see this grey box of information, and they'll look at it, and they'll say, well, what's this? And so what they'll tend to do is they'll scroll up, and then they'll read the preceding text to get that context. So again, it's a little strategy that these call-out boxes do to like grab the reader and things like that. And also what we tend to do is we put information we want to stand out in those boxes as well. But it's really important, if you do include them, you don't do it too much. Like if you're having them every paragraph, it's going to make the article look messy. It's going to like frustrate the reader and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else people should be sure to include or think about as a template for a blog post? I'll also just comment, this is pretty long. This has got to be well over 1,000 words, right?
Yeah, so that's really important as well. So most of our articles are around about 1,200 to 1,500 words, and this is something we do again. Google punishes articles. I think it's quite a low cutoff point. I think it's anything below 300 words Google punishes and deranks. But we try to do articles that are around that mark because it keeps the reader engaged. It's long enough that they're going to read it, but not so long that they'll get bored halfway down and go off and do something else. And it just is long enough to get all the relevant information in as well.
Yeah, at least, it sounds like at least 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. That's kind of the range we're talking about for a good blog post.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think the most relevant thing to do with your blog post is to only make it the word count it needs to be. So don't put... I mean, everyone in the writing industry has heard of the term fluff and things like that. So I'm really passionate about the fact that if for example, the client says to you or the customer says to you they want an article that's 1,200 words, if it's 1,300 words, if it's 1,100 words, it's not a big deal as long as you're including the information that's needed. And this goes back to what I was saying about thin content. As long as the information is clear, it's concise, and the reader can go away with new knowledge and not with the need to go somewhere else to a competitor for information. And so that's really important with word count. And the opposite side of things as well. Don't put fluff in your article. So don't beat around the bush and take a long time. Don't bury your lead to get to a point just to hit a word count, because the reader will get frustrated and they'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, that's great. Anything at the bottom? Anything you do it to end a post?
Well, you can see for this one here, we've got quite a bit of an over CTA. So we're saying high quality content takes a lot of time and dedication, but essentially get in touch with us at Copysmiths and we'll do it for you. And so this is an example of one of the more like over calls to action I was talking about earlier, where we essentially get to the end of this article, we build authority for ourselves, and then so the reader knows that we know what we're talking about, and we say, hey, get in touch with us. And so that's huge. And it probably comes as no surprise. Following that CTA, we've got this frequently asked questions section we discussed. And you'll see here we've only got a couple of questions, which, to be honest, I think 3 or 4 is fine. Maybe 2 is a little low, so perhaps this article could have had an extra question. But you'll see what we do in our frequently asked questions is we make them really short. We make them really short and to the point. So, and what I was saying about Google grabbing onto them, you'll see this frequently asked question is, what makes good content? And the answer, good content offers value to the readers. So you'll see we're being direct. We're not saying things like, oh, good content is really important to your blog. It can do this and this and this and this. Do you know what I mean? We're just saying what makes good content? This makes good content. And so Google will grab that and it will put it as your featured snippet. And we keep it short as well, so that, again, we're not so much writing for the reader here. Like we want to help them, but like we're keeping it short so Google can just grab it and put it into that featured snippet here. So it's quite interesting. You open this article and it looks like a blog article, but there's loads of little tactics in it that just make Google want to rank it, and they do work. They are really successful, and I think we've pretty much covered everything. So like having links in there, having like in-depth content, white space, frequently asked questions, visual elements, tables. Yeah, lots of like different elements that make up a successful blog article.
I appreciate you showing that. That was really a helpful visual, and I can tell you guys know what you're doing. So I'll have to have you on a separate time. Let's talk about product pages in the future. But we've just covered so much here. We've covered so much here on blog articles, and this is wonderful. So, tell the audience, we're on YouTube, we're on audio podcast as well. Who's a good fit for you? I'm looking at your pricing page, and your prices are very reasonable. I think we'll definitely be partnering with you to write some content for some of our clients.
That's awesome.
Yeah, who's a good fit? Who should reach out to you, and where can they find you?
Okay, so in terms of customers, we're pretty much looking for anyone that wants to grow their website, mostly in the e-commerce niche, but anyone who wants to see traffic increases, who wants to like make more sales, then get in touch with us. And we don't just write articles for you. We give you like information on what articles you should write. We give you information on what you need to do to help grow. We'll actually look at your website and look at areas where it has room to grow. And so like if you're wanting to do that, by all means get in touch with us.
Sam, can you just remind people too where they can find you?
Yeah, of course. So you can visit us at www.copysmiths.com.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and you guys are recruiting writers as well?
Yeah, we're always on the lookout for new talented writers, and we're essentially looking for anyone who's passionate about writing, who has a blog, their own blog that they do for their own personal reasons, or who just wants to learn writing. We're happy to bring you on board, and as long as you can take feedback well and you're passionate about the craft, we'd be happy to hear from you too.
Love it. Sounds good. So if you're buying into this and you're ready to do some better SEO and do some blog content marketing, but you don't want to do it yourself, check out Sam Boyd and his team at Copysmiths. Love it. Sam, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what's working on e-commerce.
No, thank you so much for having me.